What's up, everybody? Welcome to another amazing episode of ThinkSync. We're so glad to have you here. Rich, how you doing, man?
I'm doing good, man. We just came back from a great weekend for the holidays, kick off the holiday season,
Facts.
man. Happy
Facts.
holidays to everybody, whatever you celebrate, even if you're only celebrating being cold. Happy holidays.
Like that. Definitely like that. And if you
Mm.
guys don't have anything to do, if you want to just chill with the fam, you always can check out the other 7 episodes we dropped and enjoy those. They're like an hour, 30 minutes to an hour each. So you can really spend a day just binge watching things sync. I'm sure you'll learn a lot.
You
But
would?
with that being said, let's talk a little bit about our year, Rich. Just to start it off, on a scale of 1 to 10,
Mhm.
where would you rate your year?
Oh man. Is it fair to say I don't remember the first half of the year? Like
Yeah.
basically anything past the end of May? Mm, I've, if I was still to rank it though,
Mhm.
7.5, honestly.
Wow. And is that like a real 7.5? Like, is that a 7.5, but not going over what we talked about last episode, the whole like no mid thing, or you're
Mhm.
genuinely talking about a 7.5?
I think it's a genuine 7.5 just because like when a year is mid, like okay, 2023, I remember at the end of the year being like, yeah, like this year just wasn't hitting on them. Like this year was very mid. Like it was kind of bad. When I was talking to other people, it wasn't like yeah, I'm not gonna lie, like it wasn't the greatest year. Like, like it was pretty hard this year. Like even some people obviously said, no, it was pretty good for me, blah blah blah. Don't like those people. I'm
Dang,
kidding. I'm kidding.
dang. Why did you suffer from your own success?
Why did
Oh,
you suffer? You should have suffered with me. But
right.
like when I say that to say I know when it's a mid year, like even intuitively. So
Mhm.
like 7.5 feels accurate. Not an eight. Not an eight, but it was a good year. A lot of learning. What about you?
I probably rated it a good 6, 7 out of 10. It'll probably be like a 6.8, honestly. I think that this year I learned a lot about
Mm,
myself. There was definitely a lot of growth involved with this year. And looking back on the year, I just feel like some of it could have been better, but a lot of it could have been worse. So I'm not really mad where I'm at. Um,
absolutely.
I'm really grateful, honestly. I think that this year was just interesting. But with that in mind, I do have to pose a question for you.
Okay,
So
talk to me.
amongst our friends, I've been going around being like, oh yeah, this is a year of losing and learning. Like I keep saying that, and it's been a big
Mm,
thing in our spaces, right? But with this in mind, do you think this was more of a year of loss or learning for you? Because for me, not gonna hold
mm,
you,
okay.
this was definitely a learning year. So where do you stand?
I think I stand in a place of learning year.
Mhm.
Didn't really lose that much. Not to say that there weren't any losses, but that I was learning without loss more than I was losing, like in general. There's a lot of learning about myself, a lot of learning with a podcast, with ThinkSync, a lot of learning with my art and my potential, like to be a
Right.
good artist, where I want that to go. Like it's definitely a year of learning. I'm excited to lose now because I feel like I get to put that learning to the test just a bit.
Mhm.
We'll see how 2025 goes. See you then.
Yeah.
What about you?
What if we just shut the
What about
episode off right there?
Right. What about you?
Nah.
See?
But nah, I do think that this year was just learning. Like I said previously, it's one that was for the books for sure. Like I can't be mad the year was what it was. I can't be mad at the year for doing what it did. Um, I literally just feel better because of the year. You know what I'm saying? Um,
It's really
but
good,
I
especially with
say,
you. You went through a lot of changes, so I'm like,
yeah,
I always
yeah.
wondered.
Yeah. But like I told you, we talked about this on the phone a couple of days ago. I think that it was a year that was necessary for my growth. If I didn't have this kind of year, I would be the same kind of butthole I was last year. And I don't think I was really a butthole, but I think that in comparison to who I am now, the maturity I have, I was a.
Hmm.
But I want to
Right.
keep talking about things we learned about and absorbed. But I'm going to
Okay.
take a different approach to it. Last week, we challenged each other to look at two different projects and not really compare, contrast, but really just kind of absorb them and break down what we saw from them. You
Uh-huh.
challenged me with Garden of Earthly Delights, and I challenged you
Uh,
with one of Kendrick Lamar's newest songs, Reincarnated, off of.
Reincarnated.
Yeah, and as you can
Right.
tell from the way he said it, Rich is rocking with it. So with that in mind, Rich, how did you kind of absorb Reincarnated? What did you feel? What's that like for you?
Well, I took a couple of notes because this is one of those. It's one of those songs where it's like, okay, you listen to it and you're like, oh, like this is a flow, like he's flowing. But when you're hearing him, you don't know what he's talking about, low key.
You
Even when he says like literally the first part of the song talks about him going through PLR or what was it? Basically like or not PLR, it's no, it's PLR. It's past life regression therapy where
mm,
he's going through and he's looking at his different lot and he's being hypnotized to kind of go through his different lives, his previous reincarnations to kind of gain some kind of insight about himself. Always found that interesting. I've loved the idea of reincarnation and that being something that humans can look forward to in a way of us connecting together again. I always
right,
thought that was interesting. So it wasn't until I realized that this was that was what he was talking about, then I was able to frame the song a completely different way. Um, I love Reincarnated, man. He goes off talking about himself and kind of where he was at in the beginning before he
right,
even went to past life regression therapy, why he went to it. And then he talks about basically the idea of the seven deadly sins within music. Like talks about the gluttony of it, the greed of it, the pride, the ego that you gain, the how much he likes war. He in this song, I was thinking about how he would approach this album in general, GNX, after his feud with Drake, because we've
right.
seen Kendrick be both a very violent quote unquote, and a peaceful man in his approach to music. Um, and in this song, he kind of touches on the idea that he has his vices and he's fallen into these traps of being really high and mighty on himself, being prideful and falling into the money and doing those things. But it's weird because it wasn't really him falling into this greed. You know, it was this one of his first lives, which was what was his name? Billie Holiday. Billy in that first part of the song, first of all, that transition is genius. It's just genius. Because he goes from talk about past life to regression to going back to 1947 in Michigan. And you're sitting
No,
there
no,
like,
no.
wait a
That's
minute.
the that's the that's the guitarist. That's the guitarist. Billy was the second
Yeah, I
one.
know. Oh, Billie Holiday is the second one.
Yes, the second.
She's the singer.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah.
The original boogeyman, Johnny Lee Hooker. That's right. So and he's talking about him and how he was a backpack guitarist. He was going off. He was so ready to kind of show the world his art that he didn't want to be held down even by the father, even by his father who could have been giving him really good teaching, something to temper himself.
Right,
But he went out and he was flowing and he was undercover, and he was able to make his money in this music. But he kind of died with all of that money. He died with that much greed, with all the women falling at his feet. He didn't make anything of himself with it. And even in the second part of the song with Billie Holiday, like he was talking about, who was a great what a great performer she was, or a great songwriter she was, or a great singer she was. But how she had her vices and addiction, and how she let that addiction control her and waste her talent. And
mm,
he is kind of on that journey of wasting how to use his talent for good, or how to better use his talent now that he's seen the success that he can get from it in a sense. Um, this song is very biblically relevant. Did you know that when you first listened to it?
I didn't know when I listened to it the very first time, but that was since I did a very passive listen. But when I came back around and I like really sat down and heard the lyrics, like it became my obsession, man. Honestly.
It really did. Like it became an obsession the way I was expecting.
Hmm.
Partially it became an obsession because the Garden of Earthly Delights is very much so a biblical kind of story, or
It
has
is.
a lot of biblical themes as well. Um, and I'm gonna put y'all on game. I need y'all to sink in on this, because in the first part of the song, you would
Right.
not think it, but in the first part of the song, he's the morning star. He's not Kendrick. He's the morning star. Then he's Kendrick. Then he's the original boogeyman. Then he's Billie Holiday. Then he's Kendrick. Then he's the morning star, and then he's both. He kind of, in a way, like the when I was reading this from Genius and just kind of like repeating the song, that last bar over and over again. Um, he's listening to God, and he's kind of like, I understand why I, as a person within music, um represent mornings, like kind of have the ideals and the representation of Morningstar
Right.
like a lot more than my peers. Especially since if I we were talking about this earlier because you corrected me. I was
Mhm.
saying like I didn't realize that Kendrick was like his sin was pride, like the sin that he kind of embodied and had was pride. But you were like, no, it's wrath. I'm like, it is wrath. He talks about loving. God talks about him loving war, even though Kendrick says himself that he doesn't like war. He doesn't love war. He's like, but you do love war.
Yeah, yeah.
Talk
I think
against it, but you still like it.
right. I think in a lot of ways that pride and wrath jump between each other a lot. But I think the
Mm,
reason that I felt, at least, obviously I'm nothing but a man who's listened to his music. I don't know this man. I think, but
right.
as someone who has listened for so long, and I think have developed some kind of understanding
Understanding.
of what has been brought in front of me, or at least I try to act like I am. One thing that I always really noticed was that his music, like I saw this post on Threads, and I think it kind of related to this. It was like Section 80 was about
Mm,
how his hood was messed up, and then what you call it? What is it? What's the next? Good Kid, Mad City was about how
Good,
his
good
city
man,
was
city.
messed up. Yeah, T-Pab was about how the country was messed up. How and then Damn was how the world was messed up, and then what you call it? What's the next one? What is it? Mr. Morale and the Big Steppers is about how he was messed up, and then GNX was about how people had him messed up, right? So it was different reflections
Mm,
of that anger. And I didn't see that initially, but after I listened to all those, I was like, I went start to finish, and I really like embraced those different things. And I'm like, okay, well, it cannot be that he's just prideful about this. But the thing about pride is that pride delivers you unto wrath.
right.
Like you're like, oh, you got me messed up. You're always interrupting me. You're always doing that. So it's very easy to say that he also has a lot of pride towards things. But I feel like it's almost too broad to
That is too
just
broad.
be pride. You know what I'm saying?
Because
But
it doesn't encompass his
yeah,
reaction to the things that he's prideful about, like his community.
exactly. But it also could have shifted. I mean, like we talk about, and literally the song Savior, like Kendrick was actively going to therapy during his like kind of construction of Mr. Morale and the Big Steppers. And I think that therapy
Mm,
was an integral part of who he is now and how his sound has evolved.
wow.
Because Kendrick in 2012 was not going to write this, you know? Kendrick in 2012 was much more, Kendrick in 2012 was headed towards poetic justice with Drake, So it was like,
Yeah.
that was a different style of rapper. Actually, it might have come out before. I don't really know year wise, but my point is during the song Savior, Kendrick pointed out how he was not your savior. The music and the artists and the people who are going out here to entertain and the people who are going out here to deliver this view was not your savior. We're not saving you. We're not delivering
Right.
you onto this new place. We're not your God. Right. He
We're not.
kind of alleged that people added too much in terms of weight to what he was saying and follow his diction so strongly. And that's a good point because people often say Kendrick makes hotel music. You went to Kendrick versus J. Cole next, man. Oh, yeah, you know all about, oh, yeah, man, Assalamu, you know what I'm saying? And people do that.
Yeah.
People do that almost every time. And it's funny because Kendrick's not preaching deliverance. He's just showing us what we see. So it's not him going out his way to deliver a new truth. It's just saying what's he's being said. It's the same way as a lawyer or a doctor or a teacher or anything. They're only going to show you what they've been shown, right? They're not going to create a new concept per se because there's nothing new under the sun. We're
New
not
understanding.
deliverance from each other because we're all
We just have
experiencing.
to exactly. We just have to like restructure the way that we see it so we can communicate
That.
with each other, which is a big part of the ending of the song for me. Like
Mhm.
before I wrap up, because before I wrap up, like the again like the themes we're talking about, like the waste of talent, early death, and like not falling into gluttony. But the last
Right.
part he says, remember at the end of the song, I took the devil's story and took it back reincarnated, where he is the carnation of Kendrick Lamar, but also embodying those traits of Morningstar, not
Facts.
as secular music, not to push some kind of agenda, but to connect us as humans and to show and to be able to push his music for everyone to connect to and to understand each other
Facts.
through, not just him, for him to be able to connect with us, obviously, because art as an artist is a way for us to express those ideas that we can't keep to ourselves anymore.
Exactly that. I was actually
Really
gonna
love.
I'm gonna save that last point you said to think about art because it's something I 1000% want to talk about. but I want to make
Mm.
sure we talk about Garden Earthly Delights before we lose Garden Earthly Delights.
Oh yeah, tell
So
me about that.
this painting was the most overwhelming painting I've ever looked at in my life. I have never seen a painting that was so powerful to the point where I was scared of it before. And I won't say I was scared of it, but it definitely intimidated the hell out of me. You know, and
Absolutely.
um so this painting, right? Garden Hearth Earthly Lights is split up into three separate like images. And I believe it's where it's called a tripod or something like that.
A triptych, but yeah.
Okay, yeah, thank you. We're split into three, right? And so in the first panel, it kind of represents the Garden of Eden, and you're specifically seeing Bosch's iteration of who's the artist, Bosch. Their iterations of Adam and Eve, his iterations of Adam and Eve, and being heads held by only one person in the frame. People have assumed this is God, right? Or some iteration of God, an angel or so. Something of celestial origin, right? You look all
Hmm.
around this panel, there's nothing crazy going on. There's a lot of camaraderie, there's a lot of peace, there's a lot of love. There's only one building in this frame, and I think that's also very important to note. And if you look around, you might see one or two owls, which was alleged to be some reference to the devil, right?
Hmm.
Um, so this painting itself in the first frame, you're like, okay, well, it's just a painting. It's a painting of like the Eden. It's like, okay, cool. But then if you shift one painting over, you see a very different reality than initially presented. And it's crazy, right? Like it's just totally wild. It's super chaotic, and you're like, well, what's going on now? And it's really important to note that in this painting, no building looks like a painting you would see in the times. It was very different from what you've seen. Normally, he used I forget the name of the technique, guys. I'm not an artist, but the technique basically where you use paint to apply actual texture, so you don't smooth out the paint, but you're using it
Hmm.
to add detail in a different way. That wasn't a technique that was used very often in this time at all because everybody was using oil paints, and oil paints are very, very hard to do that with because it's oil, right? So in this second frame, everything is freaking like they're all having sex of some kind. They're all
They're
very
freaky. It's an orgy.
yeah, and it's weird because you're like, well, how do you go from the Garden of Eden to this? But it's basically a timeline into what is going to happen next. So in this painting on the second panel, which is the largest panel, mind you, we can kind of observe this to be Bosch's understanding of what he's seeing in his time, right? Like in real
Hmm.
time, what is Bosch's reality looking like? This is the area that we're looking at. And it's funny because also in this painting, right? And I'm looking at it right now, so excuse me looking down and looking back up. Um, you're not seeing a small scale orgy. You're seeing the absolute like desecration of all like religious, social, like kind of like sexual barriers. This is also the time in between the development and expansion of Christianity, as well as the middle ground between the 100 Year War, which of course is the time in
Hmm.
which like Muslims and what you call it, and different religious groups were fighting against Christianity and things like that. And then right after that, this is right before the Ottoman
The
Empire
alignment
began
period.
to fight European forces as well. So it's a very different time in Eurasia. And then you want to add on to the fact that we don't really know Bosch's religion, but we do know that he kind of grew up in a very Catholic area. This is an easily assumed, at least, just surreal view of what he was seeing, right? And
Right.
so it's like everything's having sex, everything's just getting at it, and it's super weird because the buildings I think are a distraction. Um,
Really.
I think that in a lot of ways, if you look at the buildings, you won't accept this painting for what it is because the buildings are so weird, they're so different. You're going to spend a lot of time questioning, well, what is this? What
Yeah,
is
being
this?
like, oh well, what is this? What does that mean? Like, why are they
Yeah,
shaped like this?
but I think it's very important to kind of just like look at almost every corner of this painting and see what it is going on. And you're seeing like first off, the owl grew.
Now
Owl got
I
a
was
lot bigger.
massive.
The owl got a lot bigger. There's a lot more humans, and there's a lot more places where privacy isn't respected. And I think that was a big difference there. I think the it's giving you a timeline of what's going on.
Right.
Um, and some people said that the way that Bosch designed his painting was similar to kind of like the art that you would see in books. So I watched an hour-long video on this, and I'll have to find out what it was exactly. But I really tried to understand this painting. I had to look for outside sources because I wouldn't be able to understand this at all. Um,
Facts.
but they talked a lot about how Bosch grew up in a Protestant area, Catholic area, but it was also around a lot of monks and stuff like that. There was a lot of structures dedicated to religious servitude. And I always had this question in the back of my head about the attachment between art and like religious space and how it could be misaligned with a certain bit of usage and things like that. Um,
Absolutely.
and it's just very, very interesting to see how he represents this painting. And now, if we were to move over to the third panel, which is honestly my favorite panel,
My
things have
favorite
gotten weird.
too.
Things have gotten weird. They've gotten destructive. Um, and more than anything else, guys, like I just don't. I didn't understand it. I did not understand this thing. But unlike the first two paintings, it's all black, right? Like the
Hmm.
background is black. It looks very, very spacey at first when you first look at it. And that was my first initiate. Like thought I was like, oh well, maybe this is Garden of Eden. Then everybody's out, and then they destroy the earth, and we're seeing the pieces of the earth. And I think to a degree that's still a thought I have, but it's not the same at all. It's not the same at all because if you look at the painting, you now see musical instruments, and I think that's important to note as well.
It's
You
important.
see the as you see music being used as a different form of expression than it was in the previous panels. Because in the previous panels, you also see a lot of apples. That's another good thing to point out. Because in the first panel, there are no apples, right? There's no apples. And guys, if you aren't really familiar with Christianity or any of the like Abrahamic religions, so that's Christianity, Islam, and Judaism, the apple is also kind of considered to be the fruit of knowledge that Satan tricked Adam and Eve into eating, which then
Hmm.
sent everybody down the road of debauchery and hell and stuff like that, right? But it's funny that you see so many apples in the second frame because it's like, okay, well, what does that mean? And then you see all the things going on. You see them being understanding of and aware of that they have bodies, and that's a thing. Like in the
The
Bible, that
thing.
was a part. Like Adam and Eve ate the fruit, and God realized they ate the fruit because they were covering themselves, right? And so now they're aware that there isn't this purity there.
Shame.
It's like a
Yeah.
lustful thing, right? And so you go into the next frame, and then with the apples, you see everybody kind of hoarding themselves around each other's bodies, being indiscriminate in which they like involve themselves in and things like that. That is, I believe, an underlying message as well. So it's really cool to just kind of observe this painting. Honestly, guys, this might be a really deep dive into how religion and art play a role in themselves. This is not the intention of the episode, but like
It's
we've seen
not,
a
but it's
lot of
really interesting. Like
yeah,
we've been like we weren't connecting these topics until I started listening to the lyrics. I was like,
yeah,
wait a minute,
yeah,
that kind of matches up a little too well. It's talking to each other in a lot of senses, like we're doing right now.
yes. And it's so good too. And I think it's funny because this my goal of the episode today is not to rant. And it's really hard because as I'm describing this painting, I want to go on so many tangents. I
Yeah,
want to talk so much, but I'm holding myself back so well. I'm really
you really
trying.
are.
um,
Especially, I'm a piggyback off of what you just said because in the middle panel, there's not just apples. There's so many fruits. You remember that saying? I never understood what this saying meant, but
mm,
be fruitful and multiply.
yes.
And I was like, oh, is that a sex innuendo? No shot.
Well, it may not be in the saying, but it's definitely here in this. Like it's just
Hmm.
it's so much, bro. It's so much. And the craziest part is it's just weird, bro. It's just weird.
It's
If you look at it, you're
weird.
like, this is so strange. Like, what is this? But there's just so many different ways they're involving themselves in the fruit. Like, there's people inside of weird bulbs and they're eating the fruit and having sex through the fruit. How do you?
Through
It
the fruit.
gets
Yeah,
it
how are
gets
you having
freaky
sex through
nasty.
the fruit?
It gets
It's
freaky
freaky
nasty, man.
nasty. Hmm.
Uh,
But it all ends at that third panel. No matter how you look at it, the third panel is so different from the others.
it is because the third panel is black, and that's like, okay, well, are in space have they destroyed the Earth and in Earth, and in a way you could argue they have, but I think this is actually funny enough the best visual representation of what it is now,
Mm.
right? So in this third panel, you can kind of see that they're not really having sex anymore per se. Um, but things have gotten a lot weirder. So first thing you'll see is that now humans and animals have reached a place of almost coexistence, but not it's because people are half human, half animals now. Like in this third panel, you see the results of their bestial ways, you know what I'm saying? Like there is like I want to say there's a dog or a pig. I can't really tell. My image is very blurry, but it's kind of like just it's just over this woman. There's a fish looking thing at the bottom of the panel looking up towards the woman. The cat's and the animal. There's like a dog and a cat, and they're still going at it with this human, but it's a lot going on. That's just like a tiny little 4x4 square of the bottom of the painting, mind you. And on the
Literally.
left side, people are just encompassed in music and art and things like that. Somebody has a sword through their hand. There's a man, like it's a lot. It's a whole lot, but clearly there's a fusion that was resulted by the interactions that were had in the middle panel. But there's now music and there's no more fruit. The closest thing to fruit is this like guitar, sitar, lute looking thing. It's a lute. It's definitely a lute. This lute looking thing that kind of looks like an avocado, and that's the closest thing you have to fruit in this panel. But there's also just a lot more as it goes up. There's a knife with an ear in it, which is allegedly homage to his hometown because that's what they were doing. And before it was burned down, and his name wasn't even Herman Bosch until the town burned down. He changed his name to kind of pay just like recognition and respect to the town he was in. But if you
Hmm.
just keep going up in the painting, you see these industrial like buildings at the very top. And this is kind of like why I really love about this painting. Like I don't like this painting. I'll be honest. It freaks me out. It gives me a little tension headache in the back of my mind. I'm like,
It
am I
really does.
wrong?
It's
Like, what is this
yeah. Like,
painting?
am I
Why
going
is
to
it
hell? What the hell is going on?
right? But if you look at the painting, it shows this like super industrial, dark landscape of the very top, but you kind of see this version of clouds. And when I first looked at it, I thought the world was destroyed. When I secondly looked at it, I thought it was hell. And then when I thirdly looked at it, I was like, okay, well, maybe this is what he actually sees like the nightlife of his city as, right? Just music
Mm,
sets and the amalgamation of the in-between, right? Um,
hmm.
but as a yeah. Well, go as that as you please. But now I kind of look at this and I'm like, well, maybe this is what he predicted the world to be like because they've burned everything down. They've kind of absorbed themselves into the night. But there's one thing I really, really, really want to point out. There's way more people in this panel. Like the people increased by exponents every single panel. And it's weird that the middle panel is so weird and then the third panel isn't as weird by any metric, but it's
Metric.
because they've become normalized to it. And I question you guys, the viewers and the listeners, do you think that through our habits and our deeds, we've now normalized what we consider to be strange or what we've decided upon as like our moral right? Like has
Or
our
sacred.
yeah, like has the
Hmm.
sacrifice, has the moral, like the moral path become skewed? Have we looked the other way and thought it was still straight, or have we just abandoned it? And I think that's a big thing that this painting has really brought out of me. But honestly, that's all the thoughts I have on that painting. Like I can't rate it on 1 through 10 because it's three different paintings in one. If you close it, it looks
One.
like that. It's just it's grayscale, and it's just
Yeah.
like, but yeah,
And it's just
man,
Earth.
ugh, yeah, yeah.
It's really interesting that you talked about the third panel as like the way that he sees the world like back then and then how he predicted the world to be because when I look at that painting after I studied it obviously and whatnot, I saw that painting as like this painting changed with time because the middle panel looks so normal, looks so like oh they're just it's just an orgy, like oh it looks like a party, like oh this looks grand, this looks like a great time, you know what I'm saying? Like it
Mhm.
feels so like normalized, it feels like it has a much different message than it did back then,
Yeah.
than it does now, like much more different. But then in the last panel, that last panel, the way you described it is really interesting because I just see it as straight like he double hockey sticks. It's actually called the musical hell when like its nickname because the torture devices are the musical instruments, the secular music that
Hmm.
they're listening to. So you have like the lyre and the lute, and they're like sitting in this butt of a restaurant, in this butt, and it's kind of like a restaurant. It's like this guy is looking in it. He's like, "Oh yeah, you guys are sinners, sinners,
Yeah.
sinners." Um, and I find that last panel really interesting because it's like it's so ruinous and destructive. Like it's so dark. And I didn't even realize, but you are right. There's actually far more people in that last panel than there is in the middle panel. Like there's like a part of the panel, it's like in the upper part of it when they're like running out of a cave where the ear and the knife is.
Mhm.
Every all of those are individual people, and until I just zoomed in, I really like looked at it. I didn't realize that those are individual people, and they're being forced out of this cave into
Yeah.
like torture, and from they're being forced from hiding to be like like a part of this torture, because that's where we'll end up if we keep leading that kind of life of temptation and lust and all that kind of jazz.
Yeah, it's wild. Another thing that you just kind
Wow.
of like added me a thought on top of that, and then we're gonna jump into
Mm,
the next kind of like piece we've just been jumping around. Or maybe we should talk
mhm.
about main point, but I don't care. I really want to keep talking about this honestly. Um,
Right.
but with this painting, right? With the art in mind, have you noticed that even though you don't necessarily ascribe to a standard like religious base, have you noticed
Mhm.
that the consideration of sin has remained the same?
For sure.
Like
For sure.
murder,
Across all religion or just
uh,
like in general?
I mean, in general, like I won't say all
Yeah.
religion because, of course, I wouldn't know, but within the realms of religion that we've interacted with, there's been a very big respect and understanding that anger, lust, violence, what I'm saying,
Mhm.
a objection to truth, and a habit, a habitual like stealing or want for something.
Wanting. Mhm.
Yeah, like those are bad traits. Those are the
Yeah, they
things
are
that will
very
not let
consistent
you be successful.
across. Absolutely. Like
Yeah,
we even far back then, even when we were like still making a concept of how we wanted to gather society, we knew that those things are going to be detrimental to what we can create as human beings and
right, right.
take away from, like, I guess, not, if we take the word religion away, I guess morality to exist and being able to multiply in a correct way. It's always been a concept. And I find that really interesting because that is across most religions. I mean, even in Egyptian, I mean, even in like Egyptian mythology, sin is still a concept in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
Like,
And it's not just about angering your deity. It's not about causing distress upon your like higher power, but throughout
mhm,
those religions and basings of a higher power being there, it's the respect and it's the request: live righteously, live properly.
live
And everybody
properly,
sees it like in Confucianism, and Shintoism, and Judaism, Islam, Christianity, and the what you call it, like
even in like
the
pagan
African
religions, like
mythologies and things like
Norse.
that. Yeah,
Hmm.
like it tells you you will anger your gods, but not because they wish to just like stop you from doing these things because they're fun, but because there is a natural consequence to
Consequence.
those things. And I really
Absolutely.
love that. I love that. And I love that karma is not a principle that's restricted by religion, but it's understood as a principle of universality. Which
Hmm.
is, yo, you do wrong, you get wrong. And I
You
love
get
that.
wronged. I
But
really do.
those are just all my thoughts about that space, the evolution from Vikingdom to Protestant Christian. And it's so funny.
Hmm.
It's so funny because you don't realize how much went into the revival of just different religious backings and bases. And you have to realize that like when something rises to the top, that means something falls below. And I think it's really cool to see that displayed
True.
in different ways and what that means because there is a limited amount of people who could be affected by something. So it's like I would love to see more of what finds just its way into art. I really
Hmm.
like it. I really, really like it. Um, but because I want to stay on topic, and I think we've covered art a good bit. We've covered art a whole good bit now, much more than we expected to. We thought this was going to take 20
Absolutely.
minutes. Um,
We really did. Like, and now it's just like, 35 minutes of just straight
yeah,
heat, straight fire.
crazy.
But art is one of those things that I think we as humans we want to connect to. It's a thing. It's a universal language. It's the universal language. Art is like math, where you can't, as you're going to understand math because math is logical. Math is the way that we understand our surroundings. Art is the way that people can interpret our surroundings. Somehow, some way, you're going to relate to it, even if by relating you disagree with it.
Yeah,
I find that far more powerful because when I'm making art, I like finding part of the reason why Brent is one of my favorite artists right now and why I'm studying him is
hmm,
because of all the artists that I know and love, he's the one artist that I find in his art style things that I disagree with, that I don't like, that I want to take, things from and leave some with him. Like, I am not an airbrush guy. I love the way he shades. I love his color. I'm not an airbrush guy. I think it's
right.
way too soft. I dislike it. he rocks it really well. I love his line art. I love the way he draws his characters so expressive, but also very real. Like they still have like lips and no and big noses and big eyes, and that just
Especially the
makes
lips.
it feel so expressive, especially the lips. I'm like, yeah, I was already drawing lips, but I'm really going to like dive deep into how I want that to be um
Facts.
fueled into my characters. Um,
Facts.
but it's like I love when I can disagree with an artist and like take some things from their style, leave some things for them. Um, and as an artist, the more you develop, the more I've just come to realize. Um, Wait, there was a thought. The more I've developed as an artist, the more I realize that I don't like some styles because it's not a style that I like.
Mhm.
You know? Yeah,
Yeah.
man.
Yeah. It's just I guess I can only say that I'm jealous of you guys because it seems so cool to be able to express what you view as your perception of the world in real time. I'm always going to be enthralled by that. I think like it's just amazing. Like
I
there's
mean,
no
it's nice to be enthralled in art. It's nice to be enthralled in art. It's really nice to consume art. But I think part of being an artist that I'm starting to realize now is that sometimes I have to choose between being present in my life and creative, and being extremely like reflective and consumption, and then producing. I'm always torn between shouldn't I be drawing today? Shouldn't I be making something? Or should I be living life and taking inspiration from life in order to make my creations? And there's always that draw, there's always that pull. Um, which is why there are some great artists that literally are just no lives. Picasso was a no life. I mean, granted, Picasso was like also no, Picasso wasn't the sick one. Like right? Was Picasso super sick? Like schizophrenic?
might have been. I
Which
don't really
artist
know the
was?
mental state of Picasso. I'm just not breaking his world of art, bro.
Okay, but there you know that, but that's why just mental illness in general runs with artists because it's the
Yeah.
only way we can like it's one of the like subjective parts of life that we can finally like express.
Mhm.
I say we, but I am not schizophrenic or anything super crazy. But it's still like being able to express such subjectivity and being able to connect people together is like that's the whole point. So
Yeah.
why it's why I create, and hopefully the creations mean something at some point. Who knows?
I think they will, man. I think that your art is diving itself towards a depth that I would want to see and want to read. And as you progress as an artist, I'm very, very excited. And you've been one of the people that I'm excited to see produce things.
Mm,
Like particularly because you're very embracing of other people's ideas and their perspectives. Like you've always been the one in my life to be like, well, Zeke, what about this angle? And I think that thought line, that desire to understand the other makes your art very unique. So as your style grows and stuff like that, and as you get ready as a graduate on the way, to move that forward, it's gonna be some hot stuff coming out you, bro. Pause.
definitely. Pause. Yeah, heavy pause actually. I always do keep hot stuff coming out me though. That's for sure. That's for sure. I'm always
Oh
hot and
no.
bothered.
Oh no.
um, I mean, like even
Wow.
reflecting on my art, even reflecting on the the way that I've grown, I think people have always heard me say like, "Oh, this sketchbook is really my best sketchbook." Like, "Oh,
Right.
this is like the best sketchbook I produced." And like, of course, every sketchbook I'm improving somehow, some way. But like this new sketchbook I got, it's giant. It's the biggest sketchbook I've ever had to myself, 11 by 14. That's a mini poster. Mm-hmm. It's a
Okay.
mini poster. I've only worked on copy paper up until this point, or smaller. So to
Mhm.
have so much room, it's hard to give myself an excuse to not use that much room and be super messy but experimental, and it's made it so that way I have like a different kind of organization to my my ideas, and I want to see more finished things like even within my sketchbook as I'm experimenting with different styles and shading techniques and even forms like in one of my I'll post this at some point, but in one of my sketchbooks I drew this baddie. I drew this baddie. She's tatted up, she's muscular, she's got like this really nice hair, and especially since I'm watching Special Victims Unit, she's a cop.
Nice.
Yeah, and I was like, wait a minute, I'm watching a cop show, and I just drew a cop. That's
I mean, we draw inspiration for the world we like
well,
perceive us in. So
absolutely.
that's really
But
good. It's really, really good.
and I would have never thought that I would get this good.
Hmm.
And I'm at a point now where I can't not say that I'm good. I'm just at a point where I can say, well, I still have things to work on.
Hmm. That's dope. Do you think
Mhm.
that your art's evolution was caused by something in your life? Like, was there a moment where you're like, my art is not good enough to be here yet? Or do you think it's just always been like, I know you say a lot of the times you were born with like a pencil or your pen in your hand, So do you think that you're just one who was dedicated and destined to grow towards art? Or do you think that it took a lot of effort and some hard nights for you before you really felt yourself anyways?
Well, I think it definitely took a lot of hard nights. It took a lot of nights of um, dang, it took a lot of hard nights. I mean, I was born in pencil and paper in hand, but I did stop drawing for quite some time. It wasn't really until I met you and Mr. D. Shout out my brother. Shout out him. But it wasn't until I met y'all and we started playing like Dungeons and Dragons when I really enjoyed doing art again, where
Mm,
I could see myself like creating art beyond just like myself, or a story that I would want to produce that I could like tell to the world, not because it was based in something fun, um, but because I had a basis of what enjoyment, what what creativity, what fun was, and I wanted to share that. Um,
yeah.
and but it wasn't until I don't know, like 2 years ago, like a year ago, when I kind of was so frustrated with the level of versus the skill that I had. It wasn't until then that I was like, I need to push myself a little bit. I need to get more. Um, I need to. I'm losing the words here.
You just have to lock in. You have to get it better.
Yeah, basically, I just got to get better, guys. I mean, gosh, I just have to draw more. I just have to get better.
But I
Um,
saw that process from you. Like I saw you do that. And the reason I was asking is because I know like if there was anything I learned from this year was that we do not ever acknowledge the accomplishments that we do. And we don't look at the effort we look at as a effort. We look at it as this never ending pit in which we throw our stuff in. So it never gets full. We're never satiated with that. It's a level of greed we don't comprehend. We're not
absolutely.
we're not proud of ourselves in the way we should be. Right. So I was asking you because I really wanted to see how you felt about your art because from what I've seen of you, right,
Hmm.
X Factor Inc. is soon to be the greatest. You know what I'm saying? Like, Rich, you're not a painter, but you're an artist. You're not a
Right.
sculptor, but you're an artist. You literally, like you said, you were born with a pencil and paper in your hand. And I've always seen that from you. I've always seen the dedication to making an idea heard and known. And I think it comes from a lot of being a listener for you. I think your art is a listener's art. Like you bring out what you see, you bring out what you've observed and understood, and what you don't understand makes its way into your art as well. And then you correct it. And so it's not a
Later on.
perfectionist Alice either, but it's like I love, and that's I think the reason that I've grown attached to webtoons because it kind of reminds me of our relationship as well.
Mm,
Because I have been around you so long, like one of my favorite things to do when I'm reading, when I'm looking at these things, is to see how progression has like flowed its way into itself. How like an artist has adapted to maybe the fear of releasing something, maybe that sense that he might be betraying his friends or things like that when he's going about producing this art and developing not only the willingness to stop being a dreamer but a doer, which we talked about in previous episodes, but instead to trust that he's not betraying himself and leading on to just kind of form a community behind him. Like I love to see that, and I love to see that growth that's there. And I think that
especially.
I watch you so much because I've looked at so many different forms of art, but there's no art that intrigues me more than yours because I'm
Mm.
ready to see it grow. Plus, I can manipulate it. You know,
Yeah, just
like
a little bit. You definitely had your hand in my art, and I've had my artist had a hand in your life too. I mean, it's again, I look back at a painting I did of you with your locks, and now you don't have locks,
oh,
and
you
I'm
talking
like,
about how I cut my hair 2 days after that?
yeah, I was like, was that intentional? Was
Yeah.
that caused by me? Was it because it was bad? I think that And I think that especially looking back on when I was making art in that mode,
Mhm.
I was making art in a mode of like trying to understand the people around me and developing and understanding the stories I was creating. Um, and when you cut your hair, after that, I realized I was like, wow, this piece is time gated. I understand what something means to be timeless now because this isn't Zeke anymore. Like it's a representation of Zeke. It's a look into his life, but that's not him anymore. And
Well,
I
maybe just
really
draw another me and make it a triptych. Draw two
make it
more
a
me.
triptych. Really
Yeah.
draw two more yous that are
Ones.
in a timeline in a different
Yeah.
iteration of yourself, but still the same you.
You can draw eighth grade me. You can draw me now.
No,
You're
that's not a
welcome.
bad idea.
It's your assignment idea.
Yeah, this might
Ah.
hurt. Ah,
Nah, I'm sure.
you just assign something to me? That's $80. No, I'm
Sure.
kidding. Sure,
But
lock
sure,
in.
sure. But
But
no,
the consequence of making art this way,
mhm,
unfortunately, something I wasn't ready for, is that art is so commodified. Art is everywhere. Art is the way we communicate. Therefore, it is a commodity
mhm,
that we use through capitalism in a lot of ways. And in a lot of ways, it's not going to be appreciated or it's not
yeah.
going to last that long. And that's something that I've been having to come to terms with because it wasn't like that. It really wasn't like that when we were younger. When we were younger and superheroes were the biggest thing, Spider-Man, Batman, Superman, they feel timeless. They feel
They do.
iconic. They feel like they're going to last forever. And I think that now that we're older, we recognize that they are timeless in our age,
Well, I
in this
mean,
age.
not even that. I think that they did the job of providing a source material.
True.
So it's not about it being timeless as much as it's about what body of work is it. In the same way, what body of water is it? So you have oceans, you have lakes, you have
Hmm.
rivers and streams, and they go to different places, right? So if you think about an art that is begun to die out. Mickey Mouse is dying. Mickey Mouse,
Dying.
the logo is they ran out of their copyright soon. I don't know if it just happened or it's dying like this year, I believe. But point being, we're not going to have Mickey Mouse these years onward. But
Right.
that whole like Mickey Mouse's Clubhouse era shaped so much of art, so much of music. You had so much that came from that time frame, but it was a lake and it wasn't an ocean. Now, if you
Right.
were to compare that to the story of Gilgamesh,
Mm.
the first like real epic.
Hmm.
And you compare it to source material from the Sumerian era, you look at different versions of it. So people say that the story of Gilgamesh is also David and Goliath. They say
Hmm.
it's also they say it's also the what is it like a lot of the century like X-Men versus century kind of comics and things like that. Basically,
I was gonna say even in modern day, like David versus Goliath is a framework for emotional fights, like how to
uh-huh.
like make the how to tell the story of the underdog. Just so
Exactly.
cool.
And so it's like that principle is an ocean. And the way it connects itself to different arts is how it works as a river, right? Um,
Absolutely.
but the difference is that we still drink from this, and as we grow as a population, sometimes tide pools form, sometimes smaller like creeks and other bodies of waters form, and sometimes it connects to other oceans, right? And then you notice and you begin to notice as you get older that everybody's begun to become expired by this water because we all drink. So yes, art is a commodity, but it's commodified, but it's because it's done such a great job at expressing and entertaining. I think we've come to a point as humans, we've evolved where we need art so badly that we must make it. We must cook it. It's a
Must.
part of food in the
Mhm.
body for us. And we talked about this last episode about how if you just took out art and you only had math and science, you have a very different world, and it's not a very welcome world. You
Not
know,
a very welcome world.
people need art because otherwise they get really weird. You
Yeah,
lose
it gets really
morality.
weird and people feel trapped. They
Yeah,
especially in lives that not all humans are. I mean, like there's so many differences between the person you are and the person right next to you and the person behind you and the person you don't even see. Like they live completely different lives. So to have art there to show that there is life outside of their own lives, that's kind of what humans need to want to be free or the have the desire to do more outside of themselves. It's very
exactly.
true. It's
So it's
very
like
true.
learn and make something and keep making it. I don't think any art is truly without an audience.
For sure.
And most people on this earth are connected to another person, and they tend to have similar values and respects and restraints. So it's like if you can touch one, you can touch 20. And if you can touch 20, you can touch 40. And hopefully you're doing it consensually.
Yeah,
But in total and in totality, I think that your art is currently on its road to being more than that. And it's very interesting to see it grow. To jump back to the painting thing that you did of me, it was definitely the most monumental art I've seen. That triggered the me now. You know what I'm saying? Like the way I grew up consistently doubting what I was, who I was, because I never put any effort or interest in it. Like, if you knew me when I was younger, I was a little supervillain. I'm not gonna lie. I
Hmm.
was cocky. I knew I was smart. I had the resources to be smart. I had the connections to stay smart and relevant. And more than anything else, I didn't feel like there was a wall I couldn't climb. And when I faced walls I couldn't climb, I think my ideals, my version of myself began to take on a different frame
Hmm.
as I got older and I realized that life is not something you can purely autopilot through. I became fearful of what it meant to not like autopilot. And for me, a lot of my considerations became paralysis. The fear of movement began to arise and bubble within my system. I no longer knew who I was. When I got to college, there was a very long time where I was doing things for the plot and purely the plot. And even if it wasn't for the plot, it was just for the experience. And we've had conversations about this off cam about
About
how
that.
a greed for experiences can ruin you.
It can. It can be
Uh,
destructive.
it can be only destructive because as you add and take on experiences, you take away the significance of previous ones. So the lessons mama taught you when you were 6 and you were filial until you were 7, it only applied to you were 7 because eventually that reservoir of understanding and moral growth stopped somewhere as those bad decisions arose. It's kind of like a
Absolutely.
internet file where you are finding spaces for things and you have to start deleting things to make room for more things, and it just keeps on going until you look back and there's nothing left. Or for another example, is question: when does the ship that keeps getting rebuilt stay the same ship? And so
Mm.
stuff like that plays a
It
part. But
doesn't. It
exactly,
changes. It's no
exactly.
longer fundamentally the same ship. It's a ship, but it's not the ship.
So do we change its name? And the answer most
No.
times, people are like, well, it's the spirit of the ship. It's the intentions of the ship. It's the voyages that it goes on because that's what also matters. It's the significance behind it. Because the temptations have changed a million times. The original Temptations, there is nobody left from the Temptations where they are still original Temptation. They are
Facts.
closer to the urges, the wants, the needs, the oohs
Needs.
than the
Mm.
Temptations. You know what I'm saying? But to apply that to the painting scenario that we talked about, when I looked at that painting, I realized so many things that I couldn't put them all into what it did. But this question that had appeared in my mind before, and we talked about that before, and I was like, well, who am I? Or I don't know what I am. That assuredness didn't really pop up when we were younger. Like I didn't just go around saying things like that. It was
Mhm.
like I was sure of myself. That was a known thing. Zeke was sure of himself. But when I began to not be sure of Zeke and not really comprehend all that Zeke was, looking at that painting shot me back to that question. It shot me back so hard I could not say the same because I realized that I was not the same. I was not the man who was willing to do anything to be anything because I was already something and I didn't know what that something was. I no longer heard the voices that I heard previously that guided me along a path because I had reached a new stage.
Mhm.
And so I changed everything. I cut my
Had to
hair, I
start
changed
somewhere.
my habits, I communicated differently, I reached out to family, I started building back bonds, I got into a relationship, I started learning languages again, I started studying again, I started talking to people in a way that wasn't saying me as before. But none of that would have happened if I didn't look at that painting and say, who the fuck is this guy? Because one thing that I struggle with, especially when I was a model, was that I will look at paintings and pictures of myself and I'm like, I don't recognize that guy. But it always just made me uncomfortable to look at the pictures I took. Like, you know this. I don't look at like after a photo shoot is done, I just post a picture. I go about my
You
life.
you
I
just
don't
post a
want to look at it.
picture, right?
I don't want to look at it. I hate it. But I love the art. I love the what it can be, what it is. So now that I've gotten older, I've realized what that was. I've learned enough about myself to know that the reason I didn't like the pictures of me and I didn't like the art and the camera shots of me and stuff like that wasn't because the
It's
quality.
because you didn't identify with them anymore. You didn't
Not
see
even I
yourself
didn't
in them
identify
anymore.
with it. It was just I didn't know I was looking at myself.
Mm,
It
that's
wasn't a matter of
acceptance.
identification. It was just like, who was that guy, man? And as I've gotten older, I realized you're not supposed to know, but you're supposed to be willing to find out.
Find out.
And I've become willing to find out who I am. Did you change hats? No, you didn't.
I did
So
not. I
I
wish.
don't know why I thought you were wearing a snapback for a second.
Imagine. I just come back with a snapback. Yeah. So yeah. Back to
That's
the discussion.
yeah, yeah,
Just
yeah, yeah.
change my accent and everything. Um,
Facts.
Part of my reflection of myself is through my art as well.
Mm,
When I look, people will tell you that I keep 3 sketchbooks on me. It's because I have to look back at my sketchbooks and make sure I know where I came from. Remember, like, hey, you're a lot better than you were back then, but you had some really damn good ideas back then too.
did.
And it's almost compulsive that like I can't just go with this sketchbook. I have to go with this sketchbook and the last. I have to see where those ideas came from, how they've changed, how they originated, and how I want to use them now, if I want to use them now. But it's hard for me to. It was hard for me to develop as an artist because I was stuck in uh I was stuck in a space where I could only create for myself. I was only creating for myself and my vision, and that's how I was able to push myself. Um, and it wasn't until I started drawing other people, and it wasn't really until I started not other people. It wasn't until I started drawing from my emotions and my feelings, something that my mom has been wanting me to do for forever. I still don't really do it. But it wasn't until this semester when I started drawing on my emotions and my feelings and my identity
Mm,
that I think my art really took a an explosive turn, somewhere where I don't think that my old sketchbooks look like my new sketchbook now, like in a very odd way, in a way that this feels like an actual artist. This feels like an artist that's experimenting and throwing things at the wall, and he makes mistakes, but he covers them up really well, so it's okay. Um, and I am very grateful for you because you are one of the few people that is seeing me grow from making little foldable pieces of paper that go over Pokemon cards
yeah.
to saying that you are excited to see and read the stories that I create because that's the fuel that I need to create. You just need one person to see you grow and acknowledge that you've grown to keep growing. And you have grown a lot. I mean, this year was hard for you. I was talking about how I didn't remember the first half of the year. Your first half of the year looks nothing like the second half of the year. And it wasn't really until it wasn't really until you quit modeling did I realize why you had such a distant relationship with it in a way. Like you did it as a job, which is, and nowadays people love that. Like, oh yeah, you just do something for the job and that's it. You know, you got something else you do outside of your life. No one's really passionate about their job, but they do that job because they're good at it. But you were a person where you were good at your job and you were still like, I can do it, but this isn't who I want to be. I can't do this for forever. Um, and I didn't really understand that until now, and I realized that um, you're a lot more mature because I realize now, and I want you to realize that you're a lot more mature after that, a lot more mature after that job, and all the pictures that you have of yourself. They're still a reflection of you, still a reflection of you, at least a part of you. That's the kind of go getter guy. Progress is everything, and the that's where the idea of the hive came from. Don't do that idea. Um, don't don't make the honeycomb. No, don't look at me like that. Don't ask me what the honeycomb is in the
I
comment section.
couldn't. That was an honest smile, by the way. That was nah, yeah, I want to do it again. I'll do it
Yeah,
again.
right. um, but
Oh
yeah,
man, yeah.
but yeah.
What a deep
And with that
conversation.
being said, really, what a deep conversation.
Phew. But with that being said, like you said,
Yeah, with that being said, guys, we're gonna wrap up 2024 with you. Um, I want you guys to really um, remember what you enjoyed about the year and what you learned about yourself throughout the year in 2024, because 2025 won't look the same. It won't be the same year, and hopefully, it won't be the same you. It'll be a better you. And just look out for my art and look out for the posts. Follow us on YouTube. Follow us on Instagram, Blue Sky, Instagram, Apple Podcast, Spotify, the whole nine. You know what we sound like. You know our name is ThinkSync with Zeke and Rich. Um, and yeah, don't let anything hold you back. You got anything? You got anything for him?
um, it's sink or swim, baby.
Ciao.